welcome to Kate. Actually joined us here at CRA in Wigan, where it's a beautiful sunny day, much nicer, I'm told, than in Preston, which is where she came from this morning. And welcome to this webinar, one of a series of CRA webinars, in this case focusing around this brand new NUS developed benchmarking tool in terms of academic support. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you, and particularly to welcome to Kate, who's going to be talking about the tool, introducing the tool, the current version of the tool. In fact, the final version of the tool is available. There she is. And just a couple of bits of housekeeping before we kick off. Firstly, the wall behind Kate that features up on site is actually in my office, so please don't feel it's an indication of anything other than my own personal lack of filing capacity. That's one thing to say. The second is to say to you that we will be muting microphones for the presentation, except for Kate's, of course. And the reason for that is if you're an open plan office or if there's noise in the space, we do tend to pick that up on the system. We'll unmute the mics for some conversation towards the end, but if you want to make points as we go along, please put them into the chat box, which a number of people have already started to use, and we will pick those up. I'll moderate those as we go along, and I'll feed them back into the discussion towards the end. This is everyone's opportunity, A, to find out how the tool, which a number of people contributed to back in January, has turned out, and B, to think about how you might use it. And I think in that context, the sentence in the information about the webinar, which talked about the tool being designed to start conversations between students, is really, really helpful. So, having demonstrated how noisy this place can be just then, I'm going to mute my mic, I'm going to welcome Kate, I'm going to turn off my camera, and I'm going to hand on to Kate to introduce the session, the tool, and encourage you to, as I say, add your thoughts in the chat, which we'll pick up towards the end. Thanks very much, Kate, and off we go.
Hi, everyone. Just waiting for the technology to get started. Great. Hopefully, you should all be able to see my PowerPoint, which I will show you. Okay, while I'm waiting for it to load, just thank you to those of you who have already contributed to the tool. I found it a really helpful session back at the CRA event in January to talk to genuine practitioners about the principles that we were developing. Obviously, with it being NUS, we come from a very student-led perspective, but we want to make sure that the tools are useful for everyone who wants to enhance teaching and learning. So that was a really valuable opportunity, as was running the draft tool past Amoshi. I'm going to start by introducing the tool by kind of setting it in context of the project which has produced it. So some of you may know that it's not the only one, it's now the fourth in our series of benchmarking tools, which is created through a project on enhancing teaching and learning, which is mainly focused on the National Student Survey. So we've been funded by HEFKE since 2008 to support students' unions to engage with the National Student Survey. We've also developed a strong learning and teaching policy angle throughout this project. So we started off by using the national results to show that feedback and assessment was a real problem for students. So we've done a lot of work in that area, and we've moved on now to talking about the other areas of the survey and trying to produce resources to help enhance those. So the overall aim of our project is to empower students' unions and students to lobby and campaign on teaching and learning issues. A lot of this is kind of levelling the playing field between students and academics in terms of pedagogic knowledge. So that's what we're trying to achieve. We also, as Rob said, want to start conversations between students and staff so that that enhancement can really happen in partnership. So here's some of our previous work in our old brand. Comms team would be angry with me. But back in 2008, one of the first things we did was research into students' experiences and feedback and assessment. And this was directly prompted by the National Student Survey results, placing it as the lowest scoring area on the survey. So in the middle, there's a graph there from our student experience research looking at students' expectations of assessment and feedback. So from this research, we then asked students to submit us examples of feedback they weren't happy with, and that was the great NUS feedback amnesty, where we received lots of copies of coursework through the post. So this was a second stage of research, and this eventually led on to some campaign tools such as our charter on feedback and assessment, exam stickers, so stickers to put on your exams that say please don't forget my feedback, and then finally a large and weighty feedback and assessment campaign toolkit. So this was all pre-2012, very focused on feedback and assessment, but it kind of highlights the approach that we take to developing learning and teaching resources. Between 2008 and 2012, we produced a lot of different charters on various different aspects of the academic experience, some based on the NSS, some more broad, such as the Technology Charter and the Students' Academic Rights Charter. But the two that are most relevant for this resource are the Academic Support Charter and the Personal Tutors. So what the charters are, they're a statement of 10 principles that have been drawn up by a collaborative group of elected student officers, and they outline what students expect in each area of provision. So for example, this is the Academic Support Charter. If you just Google NUS Academic Support Charter, you should lead to it. It's easier than finding it on our website. And as you can see, it focuses on kind of the infrastructure behind academic support. And that kind of thing, whereas the Personal Tutors Charter focuses on that specific role. So when we were looking at creating the benchmarking tool, we wanted to bring both of these charters together and look at practice in these areas. So the difference between the charters and the benchmarking tools, again, we're moving from principle to practice, so really tangibly looking at what can be done to enhance provision in this area. We also realised it had been at least 3 years since we'd written the charters, so a whole new group of students have come through university in that time. So we thought we should update and refine the principles to make sure they're still relevant to today's cohort of students. We wanted to share practice from across the UK, so we did manage to get student officers from Northern Ireland, from Scotland, from Wales and across England together to talk about the different ways that academic support provision is provided within institutions across the UK, and that is reflected in the tool. And just one point to make about the benchmarking tools generally, they're explicitly student-centred, so they're from the perspective of the student rather than the institution, partially because we're the National Union of Students, but also because we don't want to prescribe to institutions how they do something. We're just saying this should be the outcome for students, and however you do that, we'd like to promote innovation and that sort of thing. So whilst we're saying that the end result is a good thing, we're not saying exactly how you have to act to get there, and I hope that comes across in the tool. So just operationally, this is 5 steps to creating a benchmarking tool. It looks very easy on one slide. It takes a lot more work than this. But broadly what we did first of all is we researched into key areas of academic support in the academic literature, as well as looking at practice from institutions that our officers went to. So as an example, JJ Clark was the education officer at UE Students' Union last year, brought us his institution's personal tutoring policy and a review that they conducted, which were both hugely helpful. So this is kind of the starting points. We see what the key areas are and combine them with what we already have from the 2 charters, and kind of throw them into a room with elected student officers for 6 hours in an NUS basement to really tear apart the principles, decide whether they're appropriate, decide which are the most important, see if anything has been missed, and they draw up the draft 10 principles right there in that room. After that, we have them going around sharing horror stories about what happens if those principles aren't met, and sharing good practice if they have any. And that really provides the bones of the benchmarking tool on that day with students, so it's very student-led. After the focus group, it's time for me to go away and draw together 10 principles, get the wording correct, and test with the practitioner audiences. So anyone that was at the event in January, that was hugely helpful. I got a lot of feedback from that. After we've got the principles sorted, then we have to draft the levels of practice. So what does outstanding look like? What does kind of acceptable look like? And what does poor practice look like? And try and slot those into the benchmarking tool. The tool itself will be shared with you after this. It has just been designed, so any of you that have seen it in draft form, you can now see it in its full colour glory, and we will circulate it afterwards. So when we got the levels of practice and we got our draft benchmarking tool, we again circulated it back to the officers, the education officers that had created the tool, to make sure that it reflected what they actually said on the day. We also ran it past a MOSHE's elected executive board. That's the Association of Managers in Student Services in HE, and again got really useful feedback there. So when everyone's had their chance to input, it goes off to our national officers, so our Vice President Higher Education, checks that it fits with her agenda, she signs it off, we get it designed and hopefully launched. So we're finally at the last stage of that. So that's how it was created. We've had some feedback from the previous tools that people wanted to know a bit more about that. So I hope that's been helpful. And yes, Emily, I can circulate the PowerPoint, that's no problem. Okay, so this is what the benchmarking tool looks like. It's orange. We've not had an orange one before, so it's very exciting. As you can see, on the left-hand side are the principles, and they're in the light orange box. So this is kind of just a very broad statement about what the principle is. It's explained by a sentence on the other side of the benchmarking tool, but just kind of short for the front. And then there's different levels of practice from first steps, developing to developed. So developed is kind of where we would say is we'd hope everyone should be. And then refining and outstanding. An important thing to note about the outstanding column is that you have to demonstrate partnership between staff and students in some way. So what we say to students' unions when we present, particularly the feedback and assessment benchmarking tool, is you might not want to achieve outstanding in everything at once. You might want to focus on a couple of areas to raise them up one level. You want to just focus on one to raise it up 2 levels. It's also worth thinking about whether you can have outstanding in 2 things at once, or do they contradict each other. So the example from feedback is both feedback timeliness and feedback quality if the institution can't afford more staff time for marking. So it's really important that rather than students taking this tool and kind of beating staff with it around the head, it's very much kind of helping each other to understand each other's worlds and what students want, what staff are capable of providing, what's most important, and that kind of thing. But to achieve outstanding, there's got to be conversations between students and staff. How long did it take to complete all 5 steps? About 6 months. So we had a focus group in December, went to the CRA event in January. It's been in development since then. One of the longest stages is waiting for it to be designed, which took a month. But yeah, about 6 months for each benchmarking tool. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to chat through each of the principles and the kind of 3 key points that are made in the practice column. Obviously, you'll be able to take the full benchmarking tool and have a look at it and get a bit more information out of it afterwards, but this is just kind of a broad brush, what's in each principle. So the first principle is personalised academic and pastoral support for all students. And this is kind of about that key personal tutor role. So having a named point of contact who makes proactive contact rather than just being kind of a name in a handbook. And about providing developmental support for the student in response to their needs. So this is about whatever stage of the student journey they're at. So are they first year undergrad, third year about to do a dissertation, postgrad talk, postgrad research, on placement, that the academic support that they need is tailored to their circumstance at that specific time. I hope you like the pictures I've chosen for these, by the way. There's some surprises coming up. So the second principle is an integrated approach to academic support, which we changed from joined up on feedback from Amoshi, but that's what we mean essentially. It means that the different providers of support across the institution are joined up and talk to each other. So students aren't getting passed from pillar to post by not understanding where to go for certain support services. It also covers how informed staff are about academic support provision so that they can be good signposters. And a key thing about this is making sure that the Students' Union is in this loop. So Students' Unions provide independent advice and advocacy services, and it's important that people within the institution are aware of these and know when to signpost students onto them. Okay, the third principle is coherent institutional policies applied consistently. So this is about students talking to each other and saying, well, how come you've seen your personal tutor 3 times and I've never seen mine at all and I don't know who mine is, and that kind of thing. So making sure that support is comparable across departments, there's at least a minimum level of support that students can get. It's also about there being some kind of strategic oversight of the academic support provision, so it doesn't just happen, it's kind of planned for and it fits in with the institution's mission and that sort of thing. But also making sure that the policies that govern academic support provision are really student-centred and have the best interests of the students at heart. Okay, I chose this man because he's very creepy looking. It was quite a scary stock photo. But I think principle 4 is the most important principle on the benchmarking tool, in my opinion, and that's staff support, reward and recognition. So that's about making sure that staff that provide this support are fully trained, fully supported by the institution, that they have time allocated in their workload for academic support, that it's rewarded, that it's recognised, and that it's considered in promotion along with teaching and research. I think as long as I've had feedback actually from the CRA event that as long as this principle happens, then everything else will fall into place. And I think that's probably about right. So this is a really crucial one, I think. Principle 5 is about regular structured interactions based on mutual expectations. So we had a bit of discussion at the focus group with the officers about whether we should set a minimum standard of, at least once a term, at least once every 2 weeks, meeting with your tutor. But because that all differs so widely depending on what your current circumstances are, what your development needs are, what your support needs are, what your background is, we thought that we'd leave that as for a conversation between staff and students themselves. So it's really important to have a meeting early on where you can set between you how often you want to meet, what you're going to talk about, what the purpose of the meetings are. We have had feedback from both staff and students that sometimes they're not too clear about what they're meant to do at these meetings, rather than say, are you okay? How are things going? Having a lot more kind of a structure to the meetings is really important, so everyone knows what they're about. And also, we thought that student support needs should change over their journey. A third-year undergrad may need a lot less support than a first-year undergrad, or they may need more if they're really struggling with their dissertation, for example. So it's important that the provision of academic support is flexible and responsive to students' needs, which will change over the course of their degree. So setting a kind of prescriptive, you shall meet at least every, maybe in the way of that, or it may be a useful thing to develop a minimum standard. We can have a discussion about that afterwards if you like. I'm just going to have some tea. Okay, principle 6. This is one of my favourite pictures. This is about proactive monitoring of student progression. Learner analytics, if any of you have heard of it, it's very exciting. So this is about how the institution takes an approach to data about student performance, attendance, and that kind of thing. So keeping an eye on warning signs that show that students might be about to drop out, or students are really struggling and need some kind of proactive interventions. And it's also looking at linking in this data to an ongoing monitoring of students' progression, so looking at how they're performing and linking that into where they want to go in the future. So really linking together personal tutoring, learner analytics, and personal development. We've also got a personal development benchmarking tool coming out very soon, which covers some of these, so they do kind of link up quite well. Principle 7 is learning to learn effectively. So this is about students not necessarily coming into university knowing how best to learn. And I was discussing this with one of my managers the other day. I went to Manchester University, lovely place, and did law, but because I was one of those students who had just kind of sailed through A-levels and managed to get the grades I needed by just reading the textbook. That's what I did when I came to university, and I was quite shocked to get kind of 50% marks. This was unprecedented. Looking back, I know that's because I didn't have the first clue how to learn in a university setting. So that's a personal anecdote, but it was something that came through quite clearly in our focus group as a really important thing for students. So this is looking at the institution seeing learning how to learn as a key skill in and of itself, and therefore its responsibility to make sure that students can do it. So one of the key things about developing metacognitive skills is that they should be done in a disciplinary context. So this is about developing students to become self-reflective, critical practitioners of their discipline, knowing what knowledge looks like within their discipline and knowing how to succeed within their discipline. This is probably quite an in-depth area, like NUS hasn't gone this kind of deep and academic for a while, but it's really interesting, and there's a lot more in the benchmarking tool on this, and I think it's really exciting. Principle 8 is about collaborative learning and peer support. And this recognises that it's not just academic staff that contribute to providing academic support. The peer dimension is also absolutely crucial. But obviously, just because it's students supporting students, that doesn't mean it's the responsibility of students to make sure it happens. That's still on the institution. So we've come up with a few different sorts of collaborative learning and peer support. So there's formal stuff like peer mentoring schemes. The PATH scheme at the University of Manchester, I know Will's here, so I'll big it up, is an excellent example of that, where the institution really facilitates relationships between students and collaborative learning. But also things like group work and projects within the curriculum, so kind of making students work together and produce a collaborative project also helps build relationships and bonds, as well as obviously the skills that translate into later life. We've also got informal collaborative learning and peer support. So an example of the co-curricular would be academic societies. So for example, a society around the law department or a society around the maths department. They will talk about their subject, but they'll also be social, and that can help build bonds and communities and that sort of thing amongst students. But also social events between students and staff, particularly common on small courses, but very, very important for students to build that relationship with their staff if it's at all possible. The third key point on this is that students really understand and value the collaborative learning and peer support aspect. A lot of the time you'll hear from students that they really hate group work and they really don't like doing it, and they think it's unfair when they're marked on it and that sort of thing. But in an ideal world where, you know, academic support provision is great and students understand how they're learning and that sort of thing, they know why they're being put in groups and they try and get the best out of it. And that's a kind of cultural shift, but to achieve outstanding, that's what we hope students will think. Principle 9 is about the information about academic support provision, how that's provided, so being clear, accessible and up to date. So not just overloading students in induction with a giant handbook with everything they will possibly need to know throughout the year. Again, not just relevant to academic support provision, but relevant to anything that students need to know is proactive communication at the most appropriate time. So kind of at induction, yes. At transition points, yes. At certain changes in the curriculum, just making sure that the information is given to students when they're most likely to need it. Having an understanding of how academic support is a key part of learning and development, so staff and students seeing academic support not just as a personal tutor or kind of tack on to the curriculum, but actually a really crucial part of students' development, helping them to understand and contextualise the learning that they've got from their modules and develop them towards whatever their future goals want to be. And an important point for this one is that in order to achieve outstanding for any of the principles, the academic and pastoral support provisions have to complement and refer to each other. A lot of the literature says it's practically quite difficult to separate the two. So if your pastoral support offer isn't up to scratch, then neither is your academic support provision, I'm afraid. And finally, Principle 10, because any of you who follow me on Twitter know that I can't resist putting a cat picture into anything. Principle 10 is the only one that doesn't have 5 different levels on it because it's quite difficult to benchmark trust, respect and an effective working relationship. It's just absolutely essential for good academic support provision. So the important things here are that staff are able to adapt their approach to the needs of their students. So they understand that there is to quote NUS, a hyper-diversity of students around at the moment, lots of different backgrounds, lots of different expectations, and it's important that staff are able to change their approach to best suit the student that they've got in the room with them. It's also about having mutual respect for each other, not just as kind of educator and educatee, but as human beings and kind of people who want to do things outside of the university and that kind of thing, understanding the whole person. Probably expressed better in the benchmarking tool than in my current words, but it's all very nice. And one of the most important things on this is having an institutional culture of genuine trust and respect. And that's about it being fostered from the top down, but also from the bottom up. Everyone genuinely feels that they're on the same page, that they are committed to working in partnership with students for everyone to have the best possible education. And a lot of this kind of harks back to the cultural change stuff that is in our manifesto for partnership, which if you haven't read, I would recommend that you do. But it's basically taking all of the values that we've espoused in the manifesto for partnership and applying them to academic support. So that's the 10 principles. I'll just sum up briefly by talking about a few other issues around the tool and how it's used. So when I do sessions with student unions, we give them this slide. So we give them copies of the benchmarking tool and say, right, benchmark your institution. If you're a course rep, benchmark your course. If you're an officer, either benchmark what you think happens or benchmark your own course, depending on how much you know. So they'll read each of the principles and each of the boxes and say, okay, yeah, I think this one matches up to the provision. I think we're developed in this area, we're refining in that. We ask them to look at where the lowest areas are. Also to look at where the best practice is and whether this kind of matches up with what they already thought about academic support provision, kind of in their mind before they actually exercised the benchmarking tool on it. We also get them to think about what's important. So maybe some of the lowest areas aren't that important to students. So they go, actually, well, I'm comfortable with us being below on this because I really want to focus on this. So it's very much taking the tool, customizing it and using it for the best possible purpose within your institution. This is something else we say to student officers, so we're being completely transparent about what we're telling them to. So we tell them that they might not be able to achieve outstanding in everything at once. It might not be realistic to aim for outstanding in everything in 1 year, for example, so they really have to prioritise what aspects of each of those teaching and learning areas they want to focus on. We tell them that they've got to work in partnership with staff, so we get them thinking about how they're going to approach staff, which staff make the key decisions in this area, whether they need to talk to senior management, whether they need to talk to academics in departments, whether they need to talk to everyone. A really important point that we make is that they may not, well, you or anyone may not agree with all the principles or all the levels of practice on our benchmarking tool, and that's completely fine. I think trying to have a definitive statement of what is good practice in an area is a very difficult thing to do and not something that NUS is best placed to do. So rather than saying this is the be all and end all, we're saying this is what students think, influenced by some research. This is a good document, but we're not saying it's perfect. So if you don't agree with something in it, then that's completely fine. Have that conversation within your institutions about whether you want to take something out, whether you want to change it a little bit. I know with the feedback and assessment benchmarking tool, a number of institutions have adapted it. I know Bournemouth have got 8 principles based on the benchmarking tool, but they're slightly different to fit with their institutional context. And I think that's brilliant. That's exactly what the tools are made for. They're meant to enhance teaching and learning however that happens, and if that means challenging everything in the tool, then so be it. I am fine with that. Another thing we say to students' unions is bearing in mind the impact that anything they want to do to improve a certain area has on their postgrad students who teach. Often a kind of forgotten area for some students' unions, I won't say all, but it's important that particularly with feedback and assessment, a lot of the marking can fall to postgrad students who teach. So just making sure that students' unions are mindful of all their demographic when they're doing campaigns on teaching and learning, making sure they're not disproportionately harming postgrad students. And then the final point that we say is, are you the most appropriate person to tackle the issues? So when I was a sabbatical officer, the best approach to changing something within the university, kind of teaching and learning wise, was to introduce a policy, a university policy, and Will will know that I did this. I worked on bringing one in on feedback and assessment. That's not necessarily, I mean it can be, it's not necessarily the best way to achieve change. It's about thinking, do you want an institutional strategic approach? Do you want innovation and flexibility within departments? Do you want something that really fits well with the discipline? One of the key tenets of partnership is that power is devolved down to the level where decisions need to be made. Sometimes that is local, sometimes that is strategic, but just thinking about where you want your interventions to go. Again, a lot of this is very relevant to students' unions, but also it could be relevant within your institutions too. So we also ask people to critically evaluate the tool, and I would encourage you to take these 4 questions and consider the tool when you have it in front of you. As Rob says, we'll be circulating the tool afterwards within an hour or so. So we like to think, how could the tool help you to improve students' lives? So if you're looking at it going, what can I do with this to actually have an impact on students? Who would benefit most from using the tool? So which colleagues would you like to share what you've learned today with? Are there any issues with the tool? Do you have a problem with some of the principles, some of the practice? How would you suggest overcoming that or changing it to fit your institution's circumstances? And do you think there's any specific issues for particular disciplines, demographics or types of institution? So again, although we got a good spread across the UK, across different types of institutions from large red brick down to very small and specialist, we probably missed out some. We've probably missed out the nuance of a particular discipline or a particular institution. So really do think about how you can contextualise the tool and use it best within your own context. And this brings me to the end of the kind of dictating part of the session. I hope you have some questions for me. I saw some pop up on the right, but I've not been
Kate, if you can hear us, your sound has gone off.
Okay, it's back now. Sorted.
Okay, fantastic. And thank you for that really helpful walkthrough in respect of not only the tool, but in a way, the tool in respect of how people might contextualize it, use it as the basis for a kind of developmental conversation with other students or with colleagues. And as you said, and as I said, we'll circulate it at a later point. There are a number of questions or issues that people have raised as we've gone along. Kath, I wonder if you can unmute everybody's microphone so we can have some questions, but with the caveat that when we do that, colleagues, if your microphone is picking up a lot of external noise, you can mute it yourself and then bring it back in as appropriate. I think maybe, Kate, you might want to pick up some of the points that were raised, and I'm just picking up one that Kerry started out with from BCU, and that's the notion of the tool really as having this sort of diagnostic and developmental focus. Kerry, if you can, do you want to say anything to that, or maybe the other points that you made, and we can pick up sort of in conversation with colleagues some of the issues that people want to say.
Hi, can you hear me, Rob?
Yes, you're not very loud.
Quite quiet.
So, yeah. So
okay, I'll start that in that case. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah.
In using this as a tool with our existing academics, but also with our students, to find out about how well we're doing some of these activities in certain areas, perhaps less so elsewhere.
Yes, I mean that seems to me to be really key. Sorry, Kate.
No, it's all right. So using it as a kind of diagnostic to show where you are across the institution.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. I know I shared a draft copy of the tool with you, Kerry. I don't know, have you had a chance to use it yet?
Yes, actually, we used it on one of our MEd programs last week. So it was a module on transitions and the first-year student experience. And the students who are existing staff members within the university found it so valuable because it not only asked them, are you doing these activities, but are you going to go on to develop them and use them and kind of enhance some of the offering to your students as a part of that process. So these are academic staff members that are studying it as part of their MEd, but they're going to go away and use it in their home institutions as a kind of tool to work with their students. So they're really excited about it. So yeah, we had a great session working with it actually. So we're looking forward to the future with this. Yes, definitely.
Brilliant.
Good stuff. Barbara, if you can hear us and you've got a microphone that enables you to contribute verbally, do you want to say anything about the point you were making there about the nature of the student engagement we need in the chat box, about the orientation that students bring to the to their academic studies? Okay, Barbara's mic is still switched off, so I'll see if I can get Kath. I'm going to disappear from this space just to ask Kath to, and maybe I'll do it this way. Okay. Okay, Barbara says can only type. So I'll just read the point out. And it's Barbara said learning development occurs when students acknowledge it. It doesn't work if students are strategic, assignment focused, and seek help only to have their work checked before submission. So I guess, Kate, this is about engaging students with these principles and helping to develop some student buy-in where that may be less present than you would like in current circumstances. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, yes. So we're currently putting all the benchmarking tools together into a comprehensive guide to learning and teaching, something along those lines. And when they're all together, you can see that one of the key points of all of them is to make students better learners, so learning more deeply about their subject, being more engaged in university life more generally. So it does have a kind of ideological aspect to it where we're trying to get students to a place where they are better learners as a result of the enhancements that have been provided. So I would agree that we know there are strategic students out there. This came up with the feedback and assessment benchmarking tools as well, which is why there's points in there about kind of formative assessment, making sure that assessment is for learning and that sort of thing. I absolutely agree. You won't get them all because we're talking culture change, but that is the aim of the project generally.
Okay, Barbara's added a point at the bottom there, as has Emily. But Barbara's saying that students sometimes return with the same request. So there's an issue about how we help students in terms of seeing the opportunities for development, and Emily's point. Kerry's raised an issue about feedback from undergraduates about how effective this might be. I guess that means the tool. Dave, if you can hear me, we can hear your typing. So if you turn your mic off when you're typing, or just ask us a question, if you like. Kerry's, Kate, do you want to say anything about Kerry's point about in the feedback from undergraduate students that you've had?
I mean, because it's so new, we've not even launched it to our member students' unions yet, so it's not actually out there yet. The students who created the tool were mostly undergraduates. We did have a postgrad rep there, but the criticism we've had of tools in the past is that they are centred around an undergraduate 3-year full-time programme, which we're actively trying to counter. But I think undergraduates would be quite happy with the provisions we've put in here.
Be interesting to know if it was used or could be used for students perhaps at the Open University.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
Okay, we're talking to them next week, so maybe we can put that into the conversation. William, do you want to come in with your question? Have you got? You're unmuted, so you should be able to speak to us. Okay. Okay, but William's mic, despite the fact that he's muted, is not working.
Do you want to type your question?
Yeah, type it in the box. And we just, while you're doing that, William, we just note that Dave's point is really about the value of the project, and I suspect he'll be using it in his context, which is as head of employability, because it seems to me that working together and recognising the width of the student experiences can have some fairly important employability outcomes. Williams,
very much like our personal development benchmarking tool. Then there's a lot of that in there.
Yeah, excellent. And we may come to that because we've got shared interest there, I'm sure. William's going to type his question. While we're doing that, if people have other comments they want to make, it would be really good, I think, if people did want to use the tool. Kerry suggesting for an away day activity, and report back on the use. That would be really helpful. And I'll say more about an occasion for doing some of that in a minute. You can tell if you can hear the emergency noise outside, you can tell in the centre of the town. Okay, William's point. Okay. Learn to learn, encouraging students to listen to respond to advice and support. Okay. Kate, do you want to respond to William's?
Yeah, I'm just reading and considering.
Okay. Okay, 2 questions now.
Okay, the second one's easier to answer. Yes, the tool that we've got at the moment doesn't reference any research directly, but the compendium of all the benchmarking tools and some additional commentary has references within it. In terms of learning to learn, it's difficult because this principle was raised as something that we don't have a lot of examples of kind of good practice in. I think the best that we've got is around sort of authentic assessment stuff. So students really being helped to understand assessment criteria and engaging with those as a way of learning to learn. I would really like to find out more, and hopefully will, as the tool gets disseminated, about what good learning to learn looks like within a UK context, because I couldn't find much, to be very honest, and I'd like to find out more.
Okay.
Yeah, peer education is definitely the way forwards in terms of helping students to understand how they're learning, and also disciplinary contact. I know you're completely, I'm preaching to the choir here, Will, with your excellent past scheme.
So got to mention in the end. And Barbara was just pointing out they might consider including the tool in the work they're doing on the personal tutoring policy and handbook, so it might have quite a strategic role there. It looks new. Okay, lots of comments thick and fast now around both a query about whether support should be provided separately in terms of pastoral and academic support. In a sense, you're making a case, I think earlier on, Kate, for the need, at the very least, for some degree of connectivity between academic and pastoral support. Do you want to say anything else about that?
So, as I said earlier, the tool isn't prescriptive about how you achieve certain things. So we actually barely mention personal tutors within the tool itself. We say providers of academic support because it might be kind of different to that or a broader provision than that. We do say that academic and pastoral support have to be linked, connected and complementary, but they don't necessarily have to be delivered by the same person. We're not saying that either of those models are better or worse, and we do discuss it in the commentary for the guide that we'll be releasing soon. Just picking up Emily's point there. No, we don't take a position on whether academic and pastoral support should be separated or not. We think it depends on the institution, and as long as students are experiencing good support in both areas, that can be delivered through kind of unifying them or by separating them depending on the culture of the institution.
Okay. A couple of points from Kerry and Barbara on the Learning to Learn agenda, which you picked up on in a sense, and just in the conversation we're having at the minute, that seems to be an important area for development, because it's fairly key as people are feeding back to the to recognise the importance of student engagement with this whole process. To recognise development, and there are some issues in what Barbara's saying about the nature of the curriculum and the nature of assessment and the number of assignments.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, I've got a bit of an echo, that's true. No, I think the number of assignments is really crucial. Again, it's my big thing at the moment, but looking at authentic assessment, having the purpose of the assessment being really clear to the student and making sure that it's about learning rather than just kind of checking up along the way. I also think another key point on learning to learn is making sure that disciplinary staff understand that it's partially their responsibility too. So the tool looks in depth at kind of referring students out to kind of remedial support services, which obviously there is a place for, but that won't hit all students. So making sure that there is some degree of skills development embedded within the discipline, not only because then you'll hit all students, but also because writing a science lab report is very different to writing a history essay, for example, and sometimes generic skills provision doesn't hit all of the differences that need to be situated within each discipline.
Right, yes, the risk of one size fits nobody. Okay, I'll come, if I may, I'll come back on the issue about how people might make use of the tool, because we're, I'll say something at the end about something we're hoping to do in the context of taking this work forwards. But I wonder if you want to say anything to Emily's point, okay, which is a real challenge, and I guess a challenge across a number of institutions, staff saying they don't have time.
I would say I completely sympathise with those staff, and that's why in the tool it's framed as an institutional responsibility to make sure that they're allocating the time and the prestige to this work to make sure it's not just an add-on, because it's the institution's responsibility to make sure that their staff are well supported to deliver what is an essential service for students. It's not an add-on, it's not above and beyond, it's what students need, and it's not fair to overload staff with more stuff on top of what they're already doing, and we completely appreciate that. So we're making the challenge to institutions to empower their staff to deliver good support rather than saying, staff, you're not doing enough.
Okay, brilliant. I guess in picking up Kathy's point, and the earlier comments with Kerry, there are two possible outcomes from people trying out the tool. One is they might be able to report on the process of using it, and the other is what that tells us about current effective academic and pastoral support.
Yeah, I think when people start using the tool, we'll get some really useful information about where we are in the sector as a whole. One of the other developments that we're doing in terms of these benchmarking tools is we're looking at creating an online kind of collaborative, interactive version of them, where you would basically rate yourself as an institution or as an individual, whatever, and if you give some comments as to what the practice is, then you will be able to see comments that other people have put. So it becomes very much a practice sharing amongst people who are in the same box, but also people who want to move up to the next box. And we're really excited about that because we'll get a bit more of a sense of what's actually happening out there.
Yeah, and share that with others. That would be great. Okay. Are there other things people want to pick up on at this point? Okay. Yeah. Just Kerry picking up there the conversation starter and focus on collaboration, which I think is very much a feature of the approach you're recommending, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point of the benchmarking tools. They are a conversation starter. They're certainly not the end of the conversation. I would go as far as to say that as soon as each of them is published, they're out of date. And I'm kind of happy with that. I want these conversations to carry on happening both within institution, on our websites, on social media. Just if we can get people talking about the bread and butter issues of teaching and learning, and really thinking about how they can make them better, that's all we want, really. Obviously, and doing it as well would be nice.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions for bringing the resistors along with us? We're all converted, it was there. It's always difficult. It's like when institutions have teaching and learning conferences, and it's all the already engaged staff who come along rather than the ones who don't want to actually change their practice. So it's difficult. It's kind of the same with the whole partnership culture, getting students engaged in decisions about various aspects of the course. There's going to be a lot of people who will oppose this. I suppose having champions within the academic staff themselves is helpful. So if there's someone in the department, so for example, at an imaginary institution, if the School of Physics doesn't want to engage with any of this kind of agenda, finding one academic who does and getting them to kind of evangelize about either student engagement or this benchmarking tool or whatever can be really useful. Also, not trying to implement changes as a kind of top-down approach, I think, would be helpful. Obviously, the university have to be run and they're giant bureaucratic machines, but I think it's really important to make sure that conversations are had at each level and people get buy-in before something is imposed on them. I think that's really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And William's point about kind of working from the middle out as well, from the faculty learning and teaching committees. It doesn't have to be top-down or bottom-up. It can be middle out. Kerry's picking up the NSS scores. It's probably too early, but I'm kind of noting a degree of engagement with the idea of a teaching excellence framework. Yes. And how this kind of innovation might bear on that without having the answer to that question.
Yeah, it could be very interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Maybe we have some chance to influence the teaching excellence framework to ensure that it does have these kinds of principles and approaches built into it. Yeah, that's an interesting. That's the next challenge, maybe, or one of the many next challenges. Okay. If anybody knows what the teaching excellence framework is going to turn out to be, please write it in the chat box now. Okay. Folks, we're coming towards the end of our session. If yeah, exactly. Thanks, William. So I really just want to do a couple of things. First of all, if you have a final question or two, now's the time to ask it. I just want to thank, first of all, Kate for coming down to Preston to be with us in Sunny Wigan today and to be with all of you. It's been a really interesting session. It's great to see how the tool has developed from the initial kind of almost blank canvas that we started with in January. It wasn't a really blank canvas, but lots of gaps on the page, into this version. It's great to think there'll be a web-enabled version that, in a sense, people can respond to and build a community resource around. That will be fantastic. We will circulate the tool. I think just from the CRA perspective, I want to express an interest in the personal development tool, because that seems to me to be really very tightly connected with the conversations we've had today. So yeah, that's my next area of interest. I also want to just to flag that, having had the January conference this year, we're actively exploring the idea of a further conference in January, where hopefully some of the questions that people are asked about how these kinds of tools are used and with what kinds of results, we'll be able to give some responses to that, and maybe even find out something about how this impacts on teaching excellence. Who knows? Partnership benchmarking tool, there's another possibility. Okay.
Oh, that's exciting. We do. So the original idea for benchmarking tools came out of a 2009 version that was produced in collaboration with the HEA and with one of our staff networks, and that was on course rep systems. So this was before partnership was a thing. But no, I agree. I think some kind of not necessarily benchmarking tool, but something along those lines. I know the Student Engagement Partnership are looking into something similar, and hopefully that will be out soon.
Fantastic. And a couple of comments, one from Barbara about the diagnostic and developmental benefits of the tool, and a very particular point from Emily in Southampton, increasing the impact of student-led teaching awards. Again, it's about sharing best practice, identifying best practice. Yep. Yep. Okay. Interesting. It sounds like we're developing a new conversation, and that would be great to continue that. Not, I suspect, today though. So we're coming towards the end of the session. Again, thanks to Kate. As she said, we'll make the benchmarking tool available. If we can do that in about an hour, that would be great. But don't feel you've got to read it this afternoon. Also, we'll be making the recording of this session available with the slides, and we'll send a link to those in the next day or two. Well, today or Monday. Thanks, Kate. Thanks everyone for participating, and we'll let you have those links in due course.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.